When my wife and I moved into our new house, we were thrilled. The place was perfect for us, spacious, cozy, and in a quiet neighborhood. Despite being an older home, it had recently been renovated, so we figured we wouldn't have to worry about any major issues. On the very first day, we noticed a small hole in the bathroom ceiling. It was tiny, just enough to be noticeable, and seemed like a simple issue, perhaps some shoddy construction work. "We'll fix that later," we told each other. We were exhausted from the move, and honestly, a hole in the ceiling was the least of our concerns. Days went by, and life continued. But as the nights went on, something strange started happening. Every night, without fail, we'd hear a sound coming from the bathroom. It was subtle at first, like something scratching at the ceiling, but it was persistent. At first, we ignored it. Maybe it's rats in the attic, we thought. But there was no attic. Weeks passed, and the scratching intensified. Sometimes it was just a muffled scraping sound, but other times it felt like something was trying to push through the walls. The worst part, though, were the drips. Every night, around 3 a.m., drops of water would start to fall into the bathroom sink. They fell in a rhythmic pattern, the sound echoing through the house. But every morning, when we checked, everything was dry. Yet the dripping continued, night after night, growing more frequent. One day, tired of losing sleep, we decided to call a plumber to check for leaks. When he arrived, I explained what we'd been hearing and, of course, mentioned the hole in the ceiling. The plumber, a quiet and methodical man, climbed a ladder and began inspecting the ceiling with a flashlight. After a few minutes, he came down, his expression slightly tense. "It's not a plumbing issue," he said. "There are no pipes behind that ceiling. In fact, this ceiling was patched up in a strange way." My wife and I exchanged confused looks. "What do you mean by strange?" I asked. The plumber hesitated for a moment before continuing. "It looks like someone patched the ceiling with something that moves, like the structure inside is alive." A chill ran down my spine. I laughed, trying to break the tension, but the look on his face was serious. "This isn't normal. You might want to call someone to open it up and see what's going on." He left, leaving an unsettling feeling in the air. That night, the scratching returned, louder than before. We lay awake in bed, listening in silence as the sound seemed to crawl from one end of the bathroom to the other. The noise was more intense, like something was moving, slithering above us. At 3 a.m., like some macabre clockwork, the drops started falling again, faster this time. We knew we had to do something. The next morning, we called a local contractor and asked him to open up the bathroom ceiling. When the man arrived, he climbed up with his tools and started cutting around the hole. The sound of plaster being cut filled the house, and after a few minutes, a large piece of the ceiling finally fell. What we saw made my stomach churn. There was something stuffed between the beams of the house. It looked like a mixture of hair, skin, and fabric. It wasn't organic, but it seemed to pulse, as if it were alive. "Oh my God," the contractor murmured, stepping back. The smell that came from the opening was nauseating. Panic rippled through the room. The strangest part was that the hole hadn't been made by accident. It looked like it had been created to contain that thing, as if someone had deliberately hidden whatever was inside the walls. We left the house that night. We didn't know what that thing was, but we knew we didn't want to stay to find out. The one thing that haunts me to this day is the sound we heard on our final night as we closed the door for the last time. The scratching didn't stop. When I moved into the apartment, I was excited to start a new chapter of my life. The place was small, but perfect for me. Modern enough, with large windows that let in plenty of sunlight, and conveniently close to everything. However, from the very first day, something bothered me: the bathroom. At first glance, it wasn't anything special, but the door, no matter how hard I tried, never locked. I'd turn the key, hear the click, but with the slightest nudge, it would open by itself. At first, I thought it was just a problem with the lock, something easy to fix. I tried not to worry. After all, I was living alone, and a door that didn't lock wasn't the end of the world. But as the days went by, the feeling of unease grew stronger. Every time I took a shower, the door would open. I'd check, lock it, but inevitably, at some point while I was under the water, I'd hear the faint creak of its hinges and feel it crack open. Each time, the discomfort grew. The feeling of being watched took hold of me. I started avoiding looking directly at the door during showers, trying to ignore the chill that ran down my spine whenever it opened by itself. The air seemed to grow heavy, as if the room were closing in around me, but I kept trying to convince myself it was just a faulty door. Until one night, everything changed. I had just stepped out of the shower and was standing in front of the mirror, drying my hair. The warm steam still rose from the water, and the mirror was slightly fogged. As I looked at my reflection, something made me stop. In the reflection, I saw the door slowly begin to open, the familiar creak breaking the bathroom's silence. I stood there, frozen, watching through the mirror, too scared to turn around. The door opened wider slowly, almost as if it were being pushed with care, and that's when I saw it. Behind the shower curtain, something moved. A pale, misshapen figure peeked through the folds of the curtain. It had no eyes, but I could feel it watching me. Its skin was a sickly white, almost translucent, like it belonged to something that shouldn't be there. My eyes locked onto that reflection, and for a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. Panic began to rise inside me, but my body felt glued to the floor. I couldn't move, I couldn't even scream. All I could do was stare at that thing through the mirror. The figure didn't move, it just watched, and I knew that if I turned around, I'd be face to face with it. The air in the bathroom grew heavier, almost suffocating, and a cold chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, the door slammed shut with a bang. The sound snapped me out of my trance, and I stumbled out of the bathroom without looking back. My heart pounded in my ears, and I locked myself in the bedroom, trying to process what had just happened. That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep, replaying the scene over and over in my mind, wondering if what I had seen was real. Since then, I avoid looking directly into the mirror when I'm in the bathroom. I always feel like if I look too long, I'll see that figure again, waiting for me, hidden behind the shower curtain. The door still opens on its own sometimes, but now I ignore it, pretending nothing's wrong. Even so, every time I hear that soft creak, my body fills with dread. Whatever it is, it's still there, and I know that one day, it might be waiting behind the curtain once more. Moving into that old house felt like a fresh start. After years of living in cramped, tiny apartments, I finally found a place that seemed perfect, spacious, full of old-world charm, and with a huge bathtub that quickly became my favorite refuge. The house had its quirks, of course. The windows creaked in the wind, the wooden stairs groaned beneath my feet, but overall, it was the perfect place to unwind after a long day. That bathtub was my sanctuary. Every night, after work, I'd fill it with hot water and sink in, letting the heat ease my tense muscles. It was one of the few moments where I could completely shut off. It was during one of these nights while I was submerged that I first noticed something strange. A sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible, coming from beneath the water, like a soft murmur echoing up from the drain. The first time, I thought it was just the house's old plumbing. It wasn't unusual to hear pipes creaking and gurgling, so I brushed it off. But the sound came back. Every time I sank into the water, the whisper seemed more present, as if it was trying to reach my ears. For several nights, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the sound of the water draining, some problem with the pipes. Yet the sound seemed to form words, though distant and unclear. It started to bother me, but I was too tired to care. I just needed to relax. Then, one night, everything changed. The water was perfect, hot enough to melt away the tension in my body. I closed my eyes, letting the water cover my ears. The silence was absolute until the whisper returned, this time louder. It was different, almost human, and then, through the muffled noise of the water, I heard it clearly. "Sarah." The voice called my name. I froze. I opened my eyes, feeling dizzy for a moment, and looked around the tub, trying to find an explanation. The sound had come from the drain. My heart began to race, and I sat up, leaning over the edge of the tub, as if I expected to see something moving in the water. Everything was still. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was exhausted. That had to be it. Just exhaustion. But then, in the next instant, before I could stand, something cold touched my ankle. It felt like a hand. It wasn't the soft touch of the water. It was something solid and cold, gripping my ankle tightly. I screamed, trying to pull away, but I felt a tug. The invisible thing was dragging me down, pulling me toward the bottom of the tub, as if it wanted to drown me. Panic took over, and I fought with everything I had to break free. The hands, or whatever they were ice cold, and my heart pounded with terror. Finally, with a desperate effort, I broke free, nearly falling out of the tub, soaked and gasping for air. I crawled away, my body trembling with fear. I looked back at the tub, expecting to see something emerge from the water. But nothing happened. The bathroom was completely silent, the water calm, as if nothing had occurred. I spent that night wide awake, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. I had no idea what had happened. The voice, the cold touch, it seemed impossible, but it had been real. From that day on, I could never bring myself to get back into that bathtub. Every time I walked past the bathroom, I felt a chill, a sense that something was waiting for me there, lurking in the shadows behind the drain. I never found a logical explanation for what happened that night. But since then, I avoid even glancing at the bathtub. And every time I hear the sound of the pipes, my body tenses up, as if waiting to hear my name whispered again from the depths. If you're enjoying the stories so far, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more creepy stories just like these. And hey, have you ever had a paranormal experience? Drop a comment below and share your story with us. We'd love to hear it. Now let's dive into the next story. When I was 8 years old, I attended a primary school that had been around for decades. The building was old, built right after World War II, and over the years, it gained a strange reputation. The dark hallways, the creaking wooden stairs, and the dimly lit corners fueled rumors among the children. They said strange things happened there, but as a kid, I didn't pay much attention. Until the day something happened to me that I have never been able to forget. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those days where time seemed to drag on. I remember being bored in math class when I asked to go to the bathroom. The teacher, barely looking at me, nodded, allowing me to leave. The hallway was empty, the sound of my footsteps echoing loudly off the walls, and the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed weaker than usual. I had never noticed how silent that place could be when no one else was around. The girls' bathroom was at the end of the hallway, near the oldest part of the school, the section everyone said was haunted. I never paid much attention to those stories, but that day, as I got closer, I felt a strange chill run down my spine. The bathroom lights were off, which wasn't unusual, as the switch was outside, and the kids always forgot to turn it on. I took a deep breath and walked in, forcing my feet to keep moving, even though the silence felt too intense. As I closed the stall door, I felt such a strong sense of isolation that my heart started racing. The sound of the silence was almost deafening. I hurried, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling when suddenly, I heard footsteps. They were slow, echoing down the empty hallway, approaching the bathroom. My body froze for a moment. It must be another student, I thought, trying to calm myself. But then, something completely unexpected happened. Without any warning, a violent kick hit the stall door I was in. The noise was so loud I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. Another kick followed, even stronger this time. I held onto the door handle with all my strength, my whole body trembling. Whoever was outside wanted to get in, and the feeling of desperation began to take over. The kicks were relentless, growing more aggressive with each one. I knew I couldn't hold on for long. Seconds felt like hours as the kicks continued, unyielding. I was on the brink of panic when, suddenly, the noise stopped. The silence returned so quickly that it left me even more confused. I kept holding the door for a few moments longer, waiting for any sign that the person was still there, but everything was quiet. I couldn't hear anything, no footsteps, no voices. It was as if the bathroom had been abandoned in an instant. Still breathing heavily, I finally gathered the courage to let go of the handle and open the door. I peeked outside, expecting to see someone, but but the hallway was empty. There was no sign of whoever had kicked the door. The air felt heavy, and the weak light coming through the corridor windows seemed to make the place feel even more oppressive. I took a step out of the stall, ready to head back to class as quickly as possible, when something made me stop. At the end of the hallway, standing near the entrance to the bathroom, was a boy. He stood there, silently watching me. He was tall, thin, with a strange smile on his face, almost as if he was amused by what had just happened. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief as I recognized his face. He was from my class, I was sure of it. He sat a few desks behind me, always quiet, almost invisible. At that moment, I thought he was the one who had scared me, maybe followed me to play a cruel prank. But something about his smile bothered me. It wasn't a normal smile. It seemed empty. I couldn't see any emotion in his eyes, as if he was just imitating the gesture. Even so, I decided not to confront him. I just stared at him for a few seconds, waiting for him to say something. But he didn't move. He just stood there, motionless, staring at me, as if he was waiting for something from me. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and in that moment I realized something was very wrong. Without looking back, I ran back to the classroom, my heart racing. When I got back, I tried to compose myself, pretending nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen. It was as if my brain was trying to process everything, but none of it made sense. For the rest of the class, I glanced back a few times trying to find that boy, but he was no longer there, not even in the weeks that followed. In fact, after that day, I never saw him again. Curious, I started asking some classmates about him, describing his appearance, trying to figure out who he was. But strangely, no one seemed to remember anyone fitting that description. They looked at me like I was making things up. That's when I began to wonder if he had ever really existed. How could I be sure, if no one else remembered him? That empty smile still haunts me. And the more I think about it, the more things just don't seem to add up. Over time, I let that story fade, but I've never completely forgotten it. Something about that experience stayed with me, like a shadow following me. Years later, when I mentally revisit everything that happened, I find myself asking, what if I hadn't locked the door? What would have happened if that boy had managed to get in? I don't know the answer, but just thinking about it sends a chill down my spine to this day. I was at JFK Airport in New York with a few friends, waiting to board a flight. It was one of those trips we had been planning for months, and the mood among us was one of excitement. The terminal was packed, full of tourists and the typical chaos of an international airport. After a few hours of waiting, I felt the need to use the restroom. With the place so crowded, I wanted to avoid the long lines at the main bathrooms. I decided to ask a janitor if there was a quieter restroom nearby. She looked at me for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to share the tip, but then pointed to the end of a narrow hallway near where we were. There's a bathroom at the end. Not many people go there. It's usually empty, she said with a somewhat distant expression. I thanked her and headed in the direction she had indicated. The corridor was dimly lit and cramped, giving off an abandoned vibe. As I moved away from the main area, the noise of the crowd faded, and the silence began to weigh on my ears. I reached a nearly hidden door, tucked beside a cleaning machine that was parked nearby. The handle was worn, and the sign indicating it was a bathroom was so old it was barely legible. As soon as I entered, I regretted it. The place was filthy, with a musty smell and a sense of neglect. It felt like a bathroom lost in time, completely different from the bustling part of the airport I had just left. But since I really needed to go, I decided not to dwell on it and hurried to the farthest stall, wanting to finish as quickly as possible. Before entering the stall, I glanced around quickly. The bathroom seemed empty, or so I thought at first. That's when something in the darkest corner of the room caught my attention. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was a man standing there, partially obscured by the shadows. He was motionless, his head slightly tilted, as if he were watching me. A chill ran down my spine, and for a second, I considered leaving. But the discomfort of holding it in made me push through. I quickly entered the stall and slammed the door shut. I sat down, trying to ignore the overwhelming feeling that something was very wrong. The place was dead silent. There were no sounds of people coming in and out, no water running, nothing. Then I heard it. Slow, dragging footsteps. The man I had seen before was entering the bathroom. I held my breath, expecting to hear the normal sounds of someone using the restroom. But instead, there was only silence. No stall door opening, no toilet flushing, no paper being pulled. He just walked in and stopped. My hands began to sweat. I couldn't hear anything from the stall next to me, but I could feel his presence. The silence was unbearable, and each second in there felt like an eternity. Then I heard a faint noise, almost imperceptible, a slight movement at the top of the divider. Slowly, I looked up and I nearly screamed in terror. The man was peering over the stall, his pale, expressionless face staring down at me with a chilling coldness. Shock paralyzed me for a moment, and my eyes locked with his. It was as if he was waiting to see my reaction, feeding off my fear. In a desperate move, I screamed and shoved the stall door open with such force that it slammed against the wall. I bolted out of there without looking back, my footsteps echoing through the empty bathroom. The narrow hallway that had seemed so long before now felt small and claustrophobic. I didn't stop until I was back in the main terminal, where the sound of voices and the movement of people brought me a small sense of relief. My heart was still pounding, and my legs were shaking as I tried to act normal. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. The fear of looking ridiculous, of being that guy who got scared in an airport bathroom, kept me quiet. I went back to where my friends were sitting and forced a smile while they talked about the trip. But the truth is, the incident stayed with me. Throughout the entire trip, the image of that man's face, peering over the stall, popped into my mind at random moments, and every time it did, a shiver ran down my spine. That hidden bathroom, with its eerie silence and shadows, became a nightmare I still can't forget. Since then, I avoid any isolated corners in airports, afraid I might stumble upon something or someone waiting in the darkness. When I was 14, I lived in a pretty dangerous area. My city had a reputation for violence, so my mom always told me to be careful about where I went. But, like any teenager, I enjoyed having a little freedom. That Friday night, I made plans with two friends to go to the cinema near our school. It was one of those old, rundown theaters, but it was the only one we could afford. Little did I know that night would be the last time I would ever set foot in that place. We arrived early, bought our tickets, and went into the theater. It wasn't a particularly interesting movie, but the company of my friends made everything more fun. After a while, halfway through the film, I felt the need to use the bathroom. I excused myself from my friends and left the theater alone. The hallway leading to the restroom was almost empty, with only a few people passing by, which gave me a strange feeling. But so far, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I just wanted to get it over with and return quickly. When I entered the bathroom, there was no one else there. The lights flickered occasionally, and the silence was unsettling. The muffled sounds of the movie could still be heard from outside, but inside, it was as if I was completely cut off from the world. I chose one of the stalls at the back and closed the door. As I sat there, suddenly, I heard something that made my heart skip a beat. Laughter. But it wasn't just any laughter. It was strange, forced, like someone was trying to sound cheerful, but it was all fake. I stayed quiet, trying to listen more closely. Then I saw something that made my stomach turn. Feet. Adult feet. Someone wearing old, dirty shoes standing just outside my stall. That was already terrifying enough, but then something worse happened. The person outside started crawling. I could see their hands, thin and pale, touching the filthy bathroom floor. The laughter grew louder, and before I could fully process what was happening, that figure was trying to slide underneath the stall door. My body went into panic, but I was frozen with fear. The only thing I could clearly see was the woman's face. She was older, with messy hair and wide, crazed eyes, staring at me with a mix of madness and obsession. Her laughter was now louder, as if she was enjoying my terror. I felt that if she managed to get in, something terrible would happen. I don't know where I found the strength, but in a moment of pure instinct, I kicked the stall door as hard as I could, hitting her square in the face. She let out a high-pitched scream and recoiled, her laughter interrupted by a guttural sound of pain. I took the opportunity to unlock the door and run. I dashed past her without looking back, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. As I left the bathroom, I nearly knocked over a few people in the hallway, but I didn't care. I ran back to the theater where my friends were, out of breath and unsure of what to say. They looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't have the courage to explain what had just happened. I didn't go back to the cinema that night, or in the weeks that followed. In fact, I never went back there again. Even my friends stopped insisting we go to the movies after I told them what happened. But it was always clear that they didn't fully believe me. What I know is that the image of that woman crawling, with that disturbing smile, never left my mind. Since then, I avoid public restrooms whenever I can. The trauma from that night still haunts me, and every time I hear strange laughter, I get the same shiver I felt in that bathroom. When I rented the room in that cheap boarding house, I was excited about the money I'd be saving. As a student, every penny counted, and the place seemed like a good deal. The room was simple, a little worn, but comfortable enough. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Donna Lucia, was welcoming, though there was something a bit unsettling about how she avoided looking directly into my eyes when she spoke to me. The only issue with the room was the bathroom. From the first night, I noticed a constant dripping sound. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal, just a normal leaky faucet. The sound was faint, but irritating enough to keep me awake. During the nights, the water dripped steadily in the small bathroom, creating a rhythm that never seemed to stop. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was something that could easily be fixed. However, the dripping wasn't coming from the sink or the shower. I spent an entire night checking every faucet, every corner of the bathroom. The water seemed to be coming from inside the wall. Always at night, the sound grew louder, and I found myself lying in bed, counting each drop, the sound like a sinister clock, keeping me awake. I mentioned it to Donna Lucia, but she assured me that the issue had already been fixed before and that I shouldn't worry. Not wanting to bother her further, I decided to try and fix it myself. One sleepless night, I grabbed my tools and went to the bathroom, determined to open up the spot where the sound seemed to come from. After carefully listening to the drips, I identified a specific area on the wall near the shower. I began removing the tiles, one by one. The wall was damp, and as I peeled away more, a growing sense of dread crept over me. When I finally broke through the wall, the smell that poured out made me recoil. It was a strong odor, like something rotting, mixed with a metallic tang. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and used my phone's flashlight to illuminate the inside of the wall. What I saw inside made me choke with horror. There was something soaked and tangled between the pipes and the beams. At first, I couldn't understand what it was, but then my eyes adjusted to what the light revealed: long strands of human hair. They were soaked in a dark, viscous liquid that dripped slowly, forming the leak I had been hearing every night. The hair seemed to be growing from inside the wall, entwined with the pipes, like roots gripping the house's structure. And the liquid? It was thick, somewhere between red and black, dripping heavily onto the floor, creating the steady sound that had been tormenting me. My heart raced as I backed away, a wave of panic washing over me. This wasn't normal. It couldn't be. I ran back to my room, my body trembling with fear. I didn't know what to do. Donna Lucia. But how could I explain what I'd seen? No one would believe me. I stayed up the rest of the night, this time hearing the dripping sound even more clearly. Each drop made me wonder what else was hidden within those walls. The next morning, I mustered the courage to talk to Donna Lucia. She greeted me with the same friendly smile, but when I mentioned what I had found in the bathroom, her expression changed instantly. Her smile vanished, and she turned pale. Avoiding my gaze, she muttered something about not tampering with the walls, saying the house was old and had stories. Before I could ask any more questions, she quickly walked away, making it clear she didn't want to discuss it further. The following nights were even worse. The sound of the dripping seemed louder, as if the leak had intensified. I couldn't sleep anymore. The image of that hair, wet and soaked in something unexplainable, dominating my thoughts. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my things and left the boarding house before anything worse could happen. To this day, I wonder what was really inside that wall. I never went back to find out, but sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet place, I swear I can hear the sound of water dripping, and it reminds me of that bathroom. And what was left behind? That night, my friend Clara and I decided to take a walk in the park. It had been a while since we last hung out, so we wanted to enjoy the cool weather and the peacefulness of the place to catch up. We walked for hours, taking our time, talking about life, work, and reminiscing about childhood memories. As we started to get hungry, Clara suggested we head to the nearby McDonald's. It was a spot we often ended up at during casual nights like this. We arrived at the restaurant, ordered our meals, and were laughing about something silly while we waited. The place was relatively empty for a Saturday night, which gave it an odd vibe, but I didn't think much of it. After eating, I felt the need to use the restroom. I told Clara and went alone, leaving her at the table. As soon as I entered the bathroom, I was hit with a strange sense of unease. It was one of those small bathrooms with white tiles and harsh, cold lighting that felt almost oppressive. That's when I saw him, a man standing in front of the hand dryer, seemingly for no reason. He was slightly hunched over, muttering things I couldn't understand. He wore worn-out clothes, and his hair was disheveled, as if he hadn't taken care of himself in days. The hand dryer wasn't on, and he wasn't doing anything except standing there, staring at the ground. For a moment, I thought he might be waiting for someone or just lost in his own thoughts. I tried to ignore him and hurried through the bathroom. But as I washed my hands, I glanced sideways and noticed he was still muttering, but now it seemed like his eyes were fixed on me. The unease grew stronger. I dried my hands as fast as I could, avoiding eye contact, and left the bathroom with my heart racing. When I got back to the table, Clara could tell something was off. I tried to play it cool and suggested we leave. As we walked out of the restaurant, the cool night air seemed to ease some of the tension I felt. We were just a few steps from the car when something made me look back. To my horror, the man from the bathroom had also come outside and was now standing near the door, staring directly at us. He didn't say anything, but his gaze was intense, and the muttering that had seemed distant before now echoed in my head. My first thought was that it was just a coincidence that he had left at the same time, but then he started walking toward us. I tried to hide my panic, but Clara quickly realized what was happening. Without saying a word, we hurried to the car, and my hands were trembling as I fumbled with the keys. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw that the man was getting closer, walking faster with each step. This wasn't normal. Fear gripped us both. Clara looked back and let out a muffled gasp. He was only a few meters away, his steps heavy and quick, almost as if he was running. Finally, I managed to start the car, and we sped off as fast as we could. The man tried to catch up, but soon he fell behind, slowing down as if he had given up. We didn't speak for the first few minutes, only breathing heavily, the silence in the car broken by the hum of the engine and the sound of the road beneath us. Only when we were a good distance from the McDonald's did Clara break the silence, saying that it was the scariest thing she had ever experienced. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Who was that man? Why did he follow me? His face, the constant muttering, and the way he quickened his steps when he saw us getting into the car haunted me for days. I never went back to that McDonald's, and since that night, I always find myself looking over my shoulder when I'm in a public place. The fear of being watched or followed is something that now lives with me. When my mom recommended that cheap boarding house near the university, I didn't think twice. The rent was a fraction of what I would have paid elsewhere, and as a university student, saving money was a priority. The place had an old-fashioned vibe, but it seemed cozy enough. The owner, a friendly woman named Donna Marta, greeted me warmly, assuring me the place was safe and quiet, perfect for studying. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. I shared a room with another student, a girl named Anna, who was also focused on her studies. She seemed nice and laid back, and we quickly became good roommates. The routine was simple. We went to classes, studied, and sometimes cooked in the small kitchen of the boarding house. Even though the house was old, nothing seemed particularly strange. Not yet. It was on a regular evening, while I was cooking, that everything began to change. I was focused, stirring a pot on the stove, when I heard a distant sound. At first, it was soft, almost unnoticeable, like a melody being sung by a woman's voice. It was coming from the bathroom. My body instantly went cold. We were alone in the house, and I knew Anna was in our room. I stood still for a moment, trying to listen more closely, and then the voice became clearer. The melody was slow, almost sorrowful, yet deeply unsettling. Terrified, I dropped everything and ran to the bedroom. Anna looked at me, confused as I burst in, my face pale. "Did you hear that?" I asked, breathless. She stared at me, not understanding. "Hear what?" I explained what had happened, but she shrugged it off, thinking maybe I had heard something from outside or from a nearby house. Still, I didn't leave the room again that night. The discomfort of knowing something strange was happening in the bathroom kept me awake for hours. The next morning, the first thing I noticed was my toothbrush on the bathroom floor. I knew I had left everything in place the night before. A small detail, but it bothered me deeply. Later that same morning, while Anna was showering, I heard her scream. I ran to the door and asked what had happened. She opened the door, her face pale. "The faucet turned on by itself," she said, still out of breath, and I felt like someone was watching me. That confirmed my fears. Something wasn't right. From that day on, strange things started happening more frequently. The faucets would turn on by themselves, dripping persistently at night, with the sound of water echoing through the house. One morning, we woke up to find wet footprints on the bathroom floor, as if someone had stepped out of the shower, but neither of us had used it. We tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched was constant. The tension in the air grew with each passing night. Finally, we decided to talk to Dona Marta, hoping she could offer some logical explanation for what was happening. When we mentioned the strange occurrences, she laughed nervously, brushing off our concerns. "This house is old, girls. These things happen. It's nothing to worry about," she said, trying to reassure us. But the way she avoided our eyes gave us the impression that she knew more than she was willing to admit. Determined to find out the truth, Anna did some research on the boarding house. After some digging, she uncovered a disturbing piece of information. Many years ago, a young woman had lived in that house, back when it was run by another family. She had mysteriously disappeared, and according to rumors, her body was never found. Some said she was last seen in the bathroom. With that story in mind, everything started to make sense. The sound of the singing voice, the wet footprints, the faucets turning on by themselves. The spirit of that woman was still in the house, haunting the bathroom. Maybe she was trapped there, repeating the same actions from her life before she vanished. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a different weight in the air, as if the atmosphere had thickened. The silence in the house seemed deeper, almost suffocating. The feeling of being watched returned, and for the first time, I avoided going to the bathroom before bed. Anna was nervous too. We knew something was there, something we didn't fully understand, but it was watching us, waiting for the right moment to show itself. Since then, we've avoided the bathroom as much as possible. And every time I'm in the kitchen, just about to get lost in thought, I catch myself listening, afraid that the voice might start singing again. After a long, stressful day at work, there's nothing I enjoy more than a hot bath. It's the only time I can disconnect from everything and let my worries wash away with the water. That week, my boss seemed to be on a personal mission to overload me. Every time I thought I was done, more tasks would appear. When the clock finally marked the end of the day, I just wanted to go home and forget about the hellish day I had. I arrived home exhausted, dreaming of my bath. The hot water would be my refuge, my small moment of peace. But as soon as I walked through the door, I was greeted by an eerie silence. And when I tried to turn on the light, I realized the problem. The electricity had been cut. Perfect, I thought. The cherry on top of my day. But luckily, there was still water. I decided nothing would ruin my bath. So I improvised a relaxing atmosphere with a few candles I found scattered around the house. I filled the tub with the hottest water possible, wanting to feel every muscle unwind. The candles cast shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere that, while a bit gloomy, felt cozy. I stepped into the water, which quickly embraced my tired body, and within minutes, I felt the day's stress begin to melt away. The warmth was so soothing that I closed my eyes and let myself drift off into the relaxation. I'm not sure how much time passed, but the feeling was so intense that, without realizing it, I fell asleep. Then something woke me up. At first, it felt like I was still dreaming. I sensed something strange, like something was crawling across my skin. A chill ran through my body, and my brain, still half asleep, struggled to grasp what was happening. I opened my eyes slowly, still confused, and that's when I saw them. Small, dark, crawling creatures were everywhere, climbing up my legs and arms. They moved quickly, as if hungry, and their tiny bodies shimmered in the candlelight, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Terror hit me like a wave. I tried to move, but my body felt frozen with fear, every muscle too tense to react. The creatures crept closer to my face, and I felt a surge of panic take over. Suddenly, something inside me snapped awake. In a burst of pure adrenaline, I leaped up, splashing water everywhere, and scrambled out of the tub. The candles flickered with the movement, and for a moment, they almost went out. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I ran to the light switch, as if turning on the lights would drive away whatever those things were. But of course, the electricity was still out. When I looked back at the bathtub, something strange happened. Everything was exactly as it had been before. There was no sign of the creatures. The water was calm, the bubbles undisturbed, and the room seemed normal. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of whether what had just happened was real or if I had dreamed it while I was asleep. But what terrifies me to this day is that if I hadn't woken up at that moment, if I hadn't felt those creatures, I might have drowned. The shock had saved me, pulling me back to reality before it was too late. Since then, I've made a promise to myself: never fall asleep while taking a bath again. The sensation of something crawling on my skin has never left my mind. And even though I know it could have all been a product of my imagination, I can't help but wonder what really happened that night. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, you won't want to miss our next video. Check out 9 most disturbing true road trip horror stories, scary stories, by clicking the card on the screen or finding it as the previous video on our channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments if you've ever had a paranormal experience. We'd love to hear your stories. Stay brave, and we'll see you in the next video.